The serene valleys of Kashmir, often dubbed paradise on earth, became the epicenter of a terrifying tragedy in April 2025. A group of innocent tourists, their hearts filled with wanderlust and their minds eager to soak in the region's beauty, found themselves caught in the crosshairs of a horrific massacre. 25 Indian nationals and one Nepali citizen, their lives tragically cut short, became the latest victims of the long-standing conflict that has plagued the region for decades. This heinous act, widely attributed to terrorists operating from within Pakistan, sent shockwaves through India and ignited a firestorm of anger and grief. The carefully orchestrated attack, targeting civilians on a pilgrimage to a revered religious site, was seen as a deliberate attempt to sabotage peace efforts and incite communal tensions. The perpetrators, believed to have links to extremist groups with a history of violence in the region, had struck a blow not only against innocent lives, but against the very fabric of humanity. The massacre served as a stark reminder of the volatile situation in Kashmir, a region scarred by decades of conflict and mistrust between India and Pakistan. It underscored the deep-rooted animosity that continues to simmer beneath the surface, threatening to erupt into full-blown conflict at any moment. The attack left India grappling with the agonizing question of how to respond to such a brazen act of terrorism on its soil. In the wake of the Kashmir massacre, India vowed swift and decisive action against those responsible. The nation, united in grief and outrage, demanded justice for the victims and an end to the cycle of violence that had plagued the region for far too long. On May 7, 2025, India launched Operation Sindoor, a series of airstrikes targeting alleged terrorist camps located across the line of control in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. The Indian government, asserting its right to self-defense, declared that the strikes were carried out with pinpoint accuracy, aimed solely at neutralizing terrorist infrastructure and minimizing civilian casualties. Fighter jets, armed with precision-guided munitions, roared into action, striking a total of 9 targets identified as training camps, logistical hubs, and communication centers used by terrorist organizations. The operation, meticulously planned and executed, sent a clear message that India would not tolerate any acts of terrorism emanating from its neighbors' territory. Among the targets hit were facilities belonging to groups such as Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba, both of which have been implicated in previous attacks on Indian soil. India claimed that the strikes resulted in the elimination of a significant number of terrorists and dealt a severe blow to their operational capabilities. The operation, hailed as a success by the Indian government and military establishment, was met with a mix of reactions from the international community. Pakistan, condemning India's airstrikes as an act of aggression and a violation of its sovereignty, vowed to retaliate. The Pakistani military, denying the presence of terrorist camps within its territory, accused India of fabricating evidence to justify its actions. As tensions escalated rapidly, both sides scrambled fighter jets and deployed troops along the already heavily militarized line of control. On May 8, 2025, Pakistan launched its counter-offensive, unleashing a barrage of artillery fire and rocket attacks across the line of control, targeting Indian military positions and civilian areas. Pakistani drones, armed with explosives, buzzed through the skies, adding to the sense of fear and uncertainty that gripped the region. The Pakistani government, determined to demonstrate its resolve, asserted its right to defend its territory and vowed to respond forcefully to any further Indian aggression. The escalating conflict triggered a wave of panic and displacement, with thousands of civilians living near the line of control fleeing their homes in search of safety. Hospitals on both sides of the border were placed on high alert, bracing for an influx of casualties as the fighting intensified. The international community, alarmed by the rapid deterioration of the situation, issued urgent calls for restraint and dialogue to prevent the conflict from spiraling out of control. Section 4. Casualties of war. A grim toll on both sides. As the drums of war echoed across the Kashmir Valley, the human cost of the conflict quickly became apparent. Both India and Pakistan reported casualties, with soldiers and civilians alike caught in the crossfire. The exchange of artillery fire, aerial bombardments, and cross-border raids left a trail of destruction and despair in their wake. India acknowledged the loss of several soldiers in the line of duty, hailing them as heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice in defense of their nation. The Indian government also confirmed civilian casualties, with innocent men, women and children bearing the brunt of the indiscriminate shelling and cross-border firing. Hospitals struggled to cope with the influx of wounded, their corridors filled with the cries of the injured and the lamentations of grieving families. Pakistan too mourned the loss of its soldiers, vowing to avenge their deaths. The Pakistani government accused India of deliberately targeting civilian areas, a claim vehemently denied by New Delhi. The true extent of the casualties on both sides remained shrouded in uncertainty, with conflicting reports emerging from the heavily militarized and information-controlled region. However, one thing was clear. The conflict had already claimed too many lives and threatened to push the region further into the abyss of violence. To Section 5, the world reacts. A chorus of condemnation and calls for restraint. The international community watched with growing concern as the conflict between India and Pakistan threatened to escalate into a full-blown war. World leaders, recognizing the potential for a catastrophic regional conflagration, issued urgent calls for restraint and dialogue. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session to address the crisis, urging both sides to de-escalate tensions and return to the negotiating table. The United States, caught in the middle of a diplomatic tightrope walk, found itself in a delicate position. On one hand, the US acknowledged India's right to self-defense against terrorism. On the other hand, Washington also emphasized the importance of Pakistan's cooperation in combating terrorism and urged both sides to exercise restraint. The US, along with other major powers, engaged in frantic diplomatic efforts to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. China, Pakistan's all-weather ally, expressed its support for Islamabad's stance while calling for dialogue and a peaceful resolution to the dispute. Russia, traditionally closer to India but increasingly engaging with Pakistan, echoed similar sentiments. The European Union, concerned about the humanitarian consequences of the conflict, urged both sides to respect international law and protect civilians caught in the crossfire. The global community, united in its desire to avert a wider war, urged India and Pakistan to step back from the brink and seek a peaceful resolution to their long-standing dispute. Section 6. India stands strong, unity and resolve in the face of terror. In the face of escalating tensions with Pakistan, India stood its ground, projecting an image of unity and resolve. The Indian government, backed by a wave of public anger over the Kashmir massacre, vowed to combat terrorism with an iron fist and defend its territorial integrity at all costs. Political leaders cutting across party lines expressed their unwavering support for the armed forces and the government's handling of the crisis. The Indian public, deeply affected by the loss of innocent lives in the Kashmir attack, rallied behind their government. Candlelight vigils were held in major cities across the country, with citizens expressing their solidarity with the victims and their families. Social media platforms were abuzz with messages of support for the armed forces and calls for a strong response against those responsible for the carnage. The nation, united in grief and anger, stood as one in the face of adversity. The Indian government, buoyed by the overwhelming public support, asserted its determination to dismantle the infrastructure of terrorism and hold those responsible for the Kashmir attack accountable. India's diplomatic offensive, aimed at isolating Pakistan internationally and garnering support for its actions, gained momentum as several countries condemned the attack and expressed their solidarity with New Delhi. The Indian government, while remaining firm in its resolve to combat terrorism, also emphasized its commitment to peace and stability in the region. Section 7. Pakistan's plight, a nation on edge. As the conflict with India escalated, Pakistan found itself on edge, facing mounting international pressure and internal challenges. The Pakistani government, while condemning India's airstrikes and vowing to retaliate, also sought to downplay the situation and portray itself as a victim of Indian aggression. However, the international community's skepticism towards Pakistan's narrative, coupled with growing concerns about the presence of terrorist groups on its soil, put Islamabad in a precarious position. The Pakistani economy, already grappling with a host of challenges, felt the heat of the escalating tensions. The stock market plunged. reflecting investor anxieties about the uncertain outlook. The Pakistani rupee weakened against the US dollar, adding to the country's economic woes. The conflict also cast a shadow over Pakistan's efforts to attract foreign investment, crucial for reviving its struggling economy. Internally, the Pakistani government faced criticism from opposition parties and civil society groups for its handling of the crisis. Some accused the government of failing to anticipate India's response and adequately prepare for the fallout. Others questioned the wisdom of Pakistan's long-standing policy of supporting militant groups, arguing that it had backfired and brought the country to the brink of war. The conflict with India, while uniting Pakistanis in their condemnation of Indian actions, also exposed the deep divisions within Pakistani society and the challenges facing the country's leadership. Like and subscribe for more crucial updates.